The alarm systems in the Galactic Council chamber had not sounded in over 30 years. When they did, every representative from the 47-member species turned their attention to the central display. A distress signal was broadcasting from Kepler 44 to be a remote mining colony on the edge of explored space. The message was broken and filled with static. But the fear in the voice was clear. The Valari colony administrator was begging for help. Her name was Lyra, and her voice shook as she described the attack. The Krath Empire had arrived without warning. Their ships had appeared in orbit 3 days ago, and their soldiers had already taken control of half the colony. The Valari were a peaceful species, small and fragile by galactic standards. They had no weapons, no military, no way to defend themselves. Lyra's message ended with a simple plea that echoed through the chamber. Please, someone help us. They are taking our children. Council Chairman Varath, a tall being from a high-gravity world, called for immediate discussion. Representatives argued back and forth for hours. Everyone agreed the situation was terrible, but the practical problems were overwhelming. The nearest military fleet was 6 months away. The Kraths were known for their brutality and their practice of enslaving conquered populations. By the time help arrived, the Valari would already be in chains, shipped off to work camps across the Krath Empire. Some representatives suggested sending a diplomatic message to the Krath, demanding they withdraw. Drop pods hit the surface of Kepler 44 to be, with impacts that registered on seismic sensors across the colony. Krath soldiers rushed to their stations, weapons ready, expecting to see large landing craft or shuttles. Instead, they saw 30 small craters scattered across the colony perimeter, each one smoking in the cold night air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pods opened. Sergeant Mike Torres was the first human to step onto hostile ground. His armor sealed against the thin atmosphere, and his weapon came up in one smooth motion. Through his night vision optics, he could see Krath soldiers moving toward his position, their heat signatures bright against the cold background. They moved slowly, cautiously, like they had all the time in the world. Mike smiled inside his helmet. They were about to learn that time was a luxury they no longer had. All units, weapons free. Commander Chen's voice crackled through the communication network. Remember, protect the civilians. Everything else is secondary. Move out. Mike and his team moved into the colony with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They had trained for urban combat in environments far more hostile than this mining colony. The thin atmosphere that would leave most species gasping barely affected them. Earth's atmosphere was actually thicker and harder to breathe in some ways, and the low gravity which the Krath found normal made the humans faster and more agile than they had ever been back home. The first Krath patrol encountered the humans in a narrow street between 2 storage buildings. There were 8 Krath soldiers, all armed with energy weapons and protected by their natural armor. They saw the humans approaching and opened fire confidently. Their weapons were designed to punch through reinforced materials. It's more than enough to handle whatever armor these primitives might have. The humans did not stop. 3 of them took hits that would have killed most species, but their armor held, and they kept moving. The Krath had a moment of confusion before the humans were on them. What happened next was recorded by the Krath's own helmet cameras and would later be studied by military analysts across the galaxy. With a mixture of horror and awe, humans fought in a way the Krath had never seen. They moved constantly, using cover and darkness with perfect coordination. They aimed for weak points in the Krath armor with terrifying precision. And when they ran out of ammunition, they fought with knives, with their hands, with whatever was available. One human marine tackled a Krath soldier twice his size and brought him down with what combat instructors called a rear naked choke. The Krath soldier lost consciousness in seconds. Not understanding how he had been defeated so icily, the fight lasted less than 2 minutes. All 8 Krath soldiers were down, dead or unconscious. The human team checked each body, secured their weapons, and moved on. They did not celebrate or even pause. There were civilians to rescue, and nothing else mattered. Similar scenes played out across the colony. Krath defensive positions that should have been impossible to assault fell in minutes. The humans used the colony's infrastructure in ways the Krath never anticipated. They climbed walls that were supposed to be unclimbable. They crawled through ventilation systems, too small for Krath bodies. They operated in complete darkness, hunting the Krath like the apex predators they had evolved from. Lieutenant Marcus Johnson led his team to the main holding facility where the Valari prisoners were kept. The building was heavily guarded, with at least 40 Krath soldiers and automated defense systems. Marcus studied the situation for about 30 seconds, then made a decision that would have seemed insane to any military advisor from the Galactic Council. "We're going through the front door," he announced to his team. "Fast and loud. Overwhelm them before they can organize. Sound off if you're ready." 12 voices confirmed their readiness. Marcus counted down from 3, and then his team hit the facility like a hurricane. They threw stun grenades through the windows, blew the main door off its hinges with explosives, exploded into the building with their weapons blazing. The Krath inside barely had time to understand they were under attack before the humans were among them. The fighting inside the facility was brutal and close range. The Krath tried to use their prisoners as shields, but the humans had planned for this. 2 Marines equipped with non-lethal weapons cleared the Valari away from the combat zone, while the rest of the team engaged the Krath. The building's narrow corridors should have favored the defenders, but humans had evolved fighting in caves and forests and urban environments. Tight spaces did not scare them. They owned them inside one of the holding cells. Administrator Lyra heard the sounds of battle and pulled the Valari children closer. The noise was terrifying. Weapons, fire, explosions, and something else she could not identify. Screaming, but not from Valari. The Krath soldiers were screaming. Then the door to her cell exploded inward, and a figure appeared in the smoke. Lyra's first thought was that this was another predator, another threat. The figure was tall and heavily armored, carrying weapons that looked designed for maximum destruction. Then the figure's helmet retracted, revealing a human face. It was a woman with dark hair and intense eyes that softened when she saw the children. "United Human Nations," the woman said in slightly accented Galactic Standard. "We're here to get you out. Are any of you injured?" Lyra could not speak. She had seen footage of humans before, but seeing one in person was different. This woman radiated power and confidence, but also something else: care. She was not treating the Valari like resources to be recovered. She was treating them like people who mattered. "Ma'am, I need you to answer," the human woman said gently. "Are any of the children hurt?" Lyra finally found her voice. "To have injuries? Not serious, but they are frightened." The human woman nodded and spoke into her communication device. "Medical Team 2, holding Cell 7. Multiple civilians 2 with minor injuries, requesting immediate evac." Then she turned back to Lyra and smiled. It was a strange smile, both kind and fierce. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. We're going to get all of you somewhere safe. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Lyra nodded. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood that this human had come a very long way to help people she did not know. That meant something. The evacuation of the holding facility took 20 minutes. The humans moved through the building systematically, clearing every room and gathering every Valari prisoner. They were gentle with the civilians but showed no mercy to any Krath who resisted. By the time they were done, over 300 Valar had been freed. The Krath garrison was in complete disarray. "Commander, dot." Chen watched the tactical displays from her command post near the drop zone. Green markers indicated human positions, blue markers showed rescued civilians, and red markers tracked Krath forces. The red markers were decreasing rapidly. Her Marines were performing exactly as expected, moving through the colony like a force of nature. A communication came in from the Krath commander. He demanded to speak with whoever was in charge of the human forces. Sarah accepted the call, curious what he would say. "This is Commander Chen of the United Human Nations." "Go ahead." The Krath commander's voice was full of anger and disbelief. "What are you?" "We have fought 17 species across 200 years. None of them fought like you." "What manner of creatures are you?" Sarah's response was cold and precise. "We're the people you should have left alone. You have one chance to surrender. Release all Valari prisoners, withdraw your forces, and leave this system. If you refuse, we will remove you permanently." The Krath commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "You think your small force can defeat us? We have superior numbers, superior position, and reinforcements on the way. You have made a mistake coming here, human." Sarah ended the call and turned to her tactical officer. "Mark all Krath military positions as hostile. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free, no restrictions. Send the message to all units. We're going loud." Across the colony, human Marines received their new orders and smiled. They had been holding back, focusing on rescue over combat. Now, the gloves were off. The Krath were about to learn why Earth was classified as a death world, and why humans were the last species anyone should choose as enemies. The Krath. Reinforcements arrived in the Kepler-4 for 2B System 30, hours after the initial human assault. Fleet Commander Kraxus studied the situation reports with growing disbelief. His ground forces had been requesting emergency support, reporting impossible casualties and enemy forces that fought like demons. He had assumed the reports were exaggerated, the result of panic from soldiers facing an unexpected enemy. Now, looking at the confirmed numbers, he realized the reports had been accurate. 1,200 Krath soldiers had been deployed to secure the colony. In less than 2 days, more than 400 were dead or captured. The remaining forces had retreated to fortified positions and were barely holding their ground, against only 200 human combatants. It was impossible, absurd, and completely unacceptable. Kraxus had brought 3 warships and an additional 1,000 soldiers. He also had authorization to use orbital bombardment if necessary. The Galactic Council might complain, but the Krath Empire did not answer to the Council. They answered only to strength, and Kraxus intended to show these humans what real strength looked like. "Communications," Kraxus ordered. "Open a channel to the human commander. Let them know they have 1 hour to evacuate before we level the entire colony." The communication was sent, but the human response was not what Kraxus expected. Instead of panicking or negotiating, Commander Chen simply replied with coordinates. 3 sets of coordinates, to be precise, marking positions in space around the planet. Kraxus was still trying to understand what they meant when his sensors officer shouted a warning. "Commander, 3 contacts emerging from behind the moons. They're human ships." The human vessels had been hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They accelerated toward the Krath fleet at speeds that should have torn their ships apart. The Krath opened fire, but the humans were already moving, dodging and weaving with a precision that seemed impossible for ships that size. It was like trying to hit birds with a rock. The space battle that followed was brief and brutal. The human ships were smaller and more fragile than the Krath warships, but they fought with a recklessness that bordered on insanity. They sacrificed armor for speed, weapons capacity for maneuverability. They did not try to destroy the Krath ships. Instead, they targeted specific systems with terrifying accuracy. The first Krath warship lost its engines in the opening minutes, crippled by a series of precise strikes. The second ship's bridge was hit by what the Krath later learned was a kinetic penetrator. A simple chunk of metal accelerated to incredible speed. The third ship managed to land several hits on the human vessels, but it did not matter. The humans kept fighting even with damaged ships, kept maneuvering even when they should have been dead in space. Kraxus realized too late that he had made a critical error. He had assumed human ships would fight like Krath ships, like every other species in the galaxy. Stand and trade fire until one side was destroyed. But humans did not fight fair. They fought to win. They used every advantage, exploited every weakness, and refused to follow anyone's rules but their own. All ships. Emergency withdrawal. Kraxus ordered, but it was already too late. His fleet was scattered, damaged, and unable to coordinate. The human ships had taken control of the orbital space. They showed no sign of stopping. On the colony surface, the remaining Krath ground forces watched their fleet retreat in disbelief. They had been promised air support, orbital bombardment, overwhelming firepower. Now they had nothing except the knowledge that they were on their own against an enemy that seemed stoppable. Sergeant Mike Torres and his team had secured most of the northern sector of the colony. They had freed another 200 Volari and were now moving toward the Krath Command Center. The Krath had fortified the building heavily, turning it into a bunker that could theoretically withstand any ground assault. They had not counted on human combat engineers. Lieutenant James Park studied the command center from a safe distance. He was an engineer by specialty, but like all human Marines, he was also trained in combat and tactics. He looked at the building's structure, the defensive positions, the automated weapon systems. Then he looked at his team and grinned. "Remember that trick we pulled in training last year?" James asked. "The one the instructor said was too crazy to work in real combat." His team members looked at each other and smiled. They remembered. 3 hours later, the Krath inside the command center felt the building shake. They assumed it was another human attack and prepared to repel it. Then the shaking got worse. The walls began to crack. The floor tilted at an impossible angle. And then, with a sound like the world ending, the entire building collapsed. The humans had not attacked the building. They had attacked its foundation. Using explosives placed with surgical precision, they had destroyed the support structures that held the building upright. The command center, with all its defenses and fortifications, came crashing down in a cloud of dust and debris. Krath's soldiers scrambled out of the wreckage, confused and disoriented. The humans were waiting. They did not shoot the survivors. Instead, they rounded them up efficiently, providing medical attention and securing them as prisoners. It was almost insulting how professional they were about it. The Krath field commander, a veteran soldier named Thorax, found himself sitting in the dirt with his hands secured behind his back. A human medic was treating a wound on his head, working with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with the violence of the past 2 days. Thorax looked up at the medic and spoke in broken Galactic Standard. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you fight so hard for these Volari? They are not your species. They mean nothing to you." The medic finished bandaging Thorax's wound and sat back. She was young, probably barely into adulthood by Galactic standards, but her eyes were old, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of human history. "On my world," she said, "we have a saying. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. The Valaria are not our species, that's true. But they're people. They have children and families and dreams, and you were hurting them. So we stopped you. That's what we do." Thorax did not understand. In the Krath Empire, you fought for territory, for resources, for power. You did not fight for strangers. You did not risk your life for people who could give you nothing in return. It made no sense. But looking at this young human medic, seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes, Thorax realized that humans operated on a completely different logic than any species he'd encountered. By the end of the 3rd day, the battle for Kepler 4 for Debye was effectively over. The Krath forces had either surrendered or been eliminated. Every Volari civilian had been freed and moved to safe locations. The human casualties were 23 dead and 67 wounded, numbers that shocked military observers across the galaxy. Against a numerically superior enemy in a fortified position, the humans had won decisively. Commander Chen stood in the colony's central plaza, surrounded by freed Volari. They looked at her and her Marines with a mixture of awe and confusion. She understood. These were people who had lived their entire lives in peace, who had never experienced violence until the Krath came. Now they had been saved by creatures from a world so violent it was classified as a death trap. Administrator Lyra approached Commander Chen slowly. She had been organizing the other Volari, making sure everyone was accounted for. Now she wanted to thank the human commander properly, but she did not know what to say. "How did you thank someone for something this big?" Commander Chen, Lyra said, her voice still shaky from the trauma of the past days. "I do not understand why you did this. We have nothing to offer you. We cannot repay you for what you have done. Why did you come?" Sarah looked at the small Volari administrator and thought about how to answer. She could talk about military doctrine, about human protective instincts, about the political implications of letting the Krath's actions go unchallenged. But none of that was really the truth. The truth was simpler and more fundamental. Because you asked for help, Sarah said, and because it was the right thing to do, on Earth, we have a lot of problems. We fight with each other, we make mistakes, we're far from perfect, but we have one rule that most of us try to follow: protect those who cannot protect themselves. You needed help, and we could provide it. That's all the reason we needed. Lyra felt tears forming in her large eyes. In that moment, she understood something important about humans. They were dangerous, yes. They were violent and fierce and terrifying in combat. But they were also capable of tremendous good. They were the kind of species that would travel across the galaxy to help strangers, asking nothing in return except the knowledge that they had done what was right above them in orbit. The 3 human ships maintained position while their crews worked to repair battle damage. They had taken hits during the space battle, but nothing critical. The Krath fleet had withdrawn to the edge of the system and was maintaining distance. They were clearly trying to decide what to do next. That decision was made for them when 6 more human ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. These were larger vessels carrying additional marines and supplies. Earth was reinforcing its position, making it clear that the Krath would not be allowed to return. The message was simple and unmistakable. The Valari were under human protection now. The news of what happened at Kepler-4 for 2b spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. Every species with access to communication networks heard the same incredible story. 200 human soldiers had defeated a force of over 2,000 Krath in just 3 days. The Krath Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries, had been humiliated by newcomers from a quarantined Deathworld. The Krath High Council convened in their capital city, a massive fortress that had stood for thousands of years. They faced a crisis unlike any in their history. The defeat at Kepler-4 for 2b was not just a military failure, it was an insult that threatened their entire power structure. If other species learned that the Krath could be beaten, if they learned that the Empire was not invincible, then the 17 worlds the Krath had conquered might start thinking about rebellion. High Commander. Brax addressed the Council with cold fury. These humans have made themselves our enemies. They have interfered in our territory and killed our soldiers. This cannot stand. I propose we declare humanity an existential threat to the Empire and commit our full military strength to their destruction. We will find their homeworld and show them what happens when you challenge the Krath. The Council voted unanimously in favor. Orders went out across the Empire. Every military fleet was put on alert. Intelligence services were tasked with finding Earth and identifying its weaknesses. The Krath had decided that humans needed to be taught a lesson, preferably through the complete destruction of their civilization. It was the worst decision they could have made. Earth's response to the Krath declaration was swift and devastating. Instead of preparing to defend their homeworld, the humans went on the offensive. Within 2 weeks, human fleets appeared at 6 different worlds that the Krath had conquered in the past decade. These were slave worlds where captured populations worked in mines and factories, producing resources for the Empire. The human approach was simple and terrifying in its efficiency. They would arrive in orbit, broadcast a message to the enslaved population, telling them to take shelter, and then systematically destroy every Krath military installation on the planet. They did not occupy the worlds. They did not try to establish their own control. They simply freed the slaves, left supplies and medical aid, and moved on to the next target, at a world called Thraxis, a mining colony where the Krath had enslaved a species of amphibious beings for 20 years. The local Krath governor made the mistake of threatening to execute his slaves if the humans did not withdraw. The human commander's response was broadcast across the planet so everyone could hear it. "You have 5 minutes to release those people," the human said. "If you harm even one of them, we will land Marines and come for you personally. And trust me when I say, you do not want that. We've been very professional so far. Don't make us get creative." The Krath governor heard the message and laughed. He had over 1,000 soldiers protecting his palace complex. What could humans possibly do? He found out exactly 3 minutes later when human drop pods crashed through the roof of his palace. The Marines who emerged were not there to negotiate. They fought their way through the palace guards with mechanical efficiency, freed the slaves being held in the complex, and captured the governor alive. He was handed over to the freed slaves to face justice. The humans did not stay to see what that justice looked like. The pattern repeated across 6 worlds. The Krath forces, accustomed to fighting peaceful species with no military experience, found themselves completely outmatched. Human tactics were unpredictable and aggressive. Human technology was surprisingly advanced for such a young species, and human soldiers fought with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism when protecting others. The Galactic Council watched these events with growing alarm. Chairman Vorath called an emergency session to discuss the human actions. Many representatives were upset that Earth had violated dozens of interstellar laws. There were rules about military intervention, about respecting territorial boundaries, about the proper procedures for resolving conflicts. The humans had ignored all of them. Dr. Zara stood once again before the council. This time, not as a fearful advisor, but as someone who had seen what humans could do. She had visited Kepler 4-4 to be after the battle, had spoken with Commander Chen and her Marines, had seen the care they showed to the rescued Valari. Now she had to make the council understand what they were dealing with. "You are judging humans by our standards," Zara said to the assembled representatives. "You see them breaking rules and assume they are chaos. But they have their own rules, their own code. And that code says that when someone hurts the innocent, you stop them. Not through diplomacy, not through committees and debates. You stop them with force if necessary. Yes, this makes them dangerous. But it also makes them the most reliable protectors the galaxy has ever seen." Representative Krell, who had opposed contacting Earth from the beginning, stood to challenge Zara. "Reliable? They are rampaging across the galaxy, destroying Krath installations at will. How is this behavior acceptable? What happens when they decide we are the threat?" Before Zara could answer, the chamber doors opened and Commander Sarah Chen walked in. She was not supposed to be there. Military officers did not simply appear at council sessions unannounced, but the security guards who tried to stop her took one look at her face and stepped aside. There was something about the way she carried herself, the confidence and authority that came from commanding warriors in battle, that made even armed guards hesitate. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber and addressed the council directly. She did not ask for permission to speak. She simply spoke, and the entire council listened. "I've heard your complaints," Sarah said. "You think we're too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous to be part of your civilization? Maybe you're right. Earth is a hard world that made hard people. We fight and we kill, and we don't apologize for it. But I want you to understand something. Every human who died at Kepler 4-4 to be volunteered to be there, they knew they might not come home. They went anyway because the Valari needed help. We didn't ask for payment. We didn't demand territory or resources. We went because it was right." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. "The Krath declared war on us because we embarrassed them. Fine. We'll fight that war. And when we're done, the Krath will never take slaves again. But here's what you need to know about humans. We don't fight to conquer. We fight to protect. Every species the Krath enslaved is being freed right now by human Marines. We're not occupying their worlds. We're liberating them and then leaving. That's who we are." Chairman Vorath studied the human commander carefully. He had reviewed the battle reports from Kepler 4-4-B and the other liberation operations. The human casualty numbers were impossibly low. Their efficiency was frightening. But more than that, their behavior was consistent. They freed slaves and asked nothing in return. They risked their lives for strangers. This was not the behavior of a species interested in conquest. Commander Chen Vorath said slowly, "What does Earth want from the Galactic Council?" Sarah's answer was simple. "We want to be left alone to do what we do. You have your rules and your procedures. They work for you. But they don't work when children are being taken as slaves. So here's our proposal. Lift the quarantine on Earth. Let us join the galactic community. And when someone threatens the innocent, when diplomacy fails and the rules don't work, you let us handle it. We'll be your protectors, your last resort, the ones you call when everything else has failed." The council debated for hours after Sarah left. Some representatives were still afraid of what humans might become. Others argued that humanity had already proven their worth. In the end, Chairman Vorath made a decision. The quarantine would be lifted. Earth would be invited to join the Galactic Council as a full member with one specific role: military protection for species unable to defend themselves. The humans accepted the invitation, but added their own condition. They would not be anyone's soldiers, following orders from politicians who had never seen combat. They would operate independently, responding to threats as they saw fit. The council could request their help, but could not command them. It was an unusual arrangement, but given the alternatives, the council agreed. 3 months after the battle at Kepler 44, a monument was erected in the colony's central plaza. It was a simple stone marker, not much taller than a Volari adult, with the names of the 23 humans who had died in the liberation. Below the names was an inscription in both human English and Galactic Standard. Dr. Zara had helped choose the words, selecting a quote from human literature that she felt captured their spirit. The inscription read, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Administrator Lyra stood before the monument with a group of Volari children. She explained to them what had happened, how the humans had come from across the galaxy to save them. The children asked questions about Earth, about what made it such a dangerous world. Lyra tried to explain, but she realized she did not fully understand it herself. Then one of the children asked a simple question: "Will the humans come back if we need them again?" Lyra thought about Commander Chen and Sergeant Torres and all the other Marines she had met. She thought about their fierce determination and their gentle care for the Volari they had rescued. She thought about the way they had fought like demons to protect strangers and had asked nothing in return. As Lyra said with absolute certainty, "If we ever need them, they will come." That is what humans do. Across the galaxy, the phrase "the humans are coming" began to take on two very different meanings. To those who preyed on the weak, to slavers and tyrants and bullies, it was a threat that inspired fear. But to those who needed help, to the oppressed and the endangered, it was a promise of hope. Earth had entered the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same. The Deathworlders had arrived, bringing with them violence and compassion in equal measure. They would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. They would stand against tyranny wherever they found it, and they would remind the galaxy of a simple truth that had been forgotten. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who choose to protect the prey in orbit above Earth. New ships were already being built. More Marines were training for deployment. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars, and that purpose was simple. They would be the shield for the defenseless, the sword against the cruel. They would be the ones who answered the call when all hope seemed lost. They would be the Deathworlders, who chose to save lives instead of taking them. And the galaxy would be forever grateful for their choice. Hers laughed bitterly at this suggestion. The craft did not respond to diplomacy. They understood only strength, and the Council had no strength to project so far from their core worlds. The discussion went in circles, and with each passing hour, the Volari were suffering. Dr. Zara stood up from her seat in the observation gallery. She was Volari herself, one of the few of her species who worked directly with the Galactic Council as a scientific advisor. Her hands trembled as she made her way to the speaking platform. Chairman Vorath looked surprised, but allowed her to address the council. It was unusual for advisors to speak during emergency sessions, but these were unusual circumstances. Zara's voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke. She told the council there was one option they had not considered. There was a species, quarantined on the far side of the galaxy, that could reach Kepler 44 to be in time. They had the military capability, the ships, and most importantly, they specialized in exactly this kind of rapid response. The council members looked at each other in confusion. Then understanding began to dawn on their faces, followed quickly by expressions of horror. "You cannot be suggesting we contact Earth," said Representative Krell. his scales turning a dark shade of disapproval. The humans are dangerous. Their world is classified as a Category 9 death world. They are violent, aggressive, and completely unpredictable.
Ouch.
Zara had expected this reaction. The humans had been discovered only 15 years ago, and the initial contact had been shocking. Earth was a world that should not have produced intelligent life. It had extreme gravity, dangerous weather, countless diseases, and predators that could kill with ease. Somehow, humans had not just survived, but thrived. They had conquered their entire planet and reached into space. The Galactic Council had immediately placed Earth under quarantine, fearing what such a violent species might do if allowed into civilized space. But Zara had met humans. 5 years ago, she had been part of a scientific delegation allowed to visit Earth's orbital station. She had been terrified at first. The humans were tall and heavily built, designed by evolution to survive on their brutal homeworld. They moved with a predator's grace that set off every instinct in her prey species' brain. But then she had worked with a human scientist named David Chen. He had been patient with her fear, had gone out of his way to make her comfortable, and had shown her human culture and art and music. She had learned that humans were complicated beings. Yes, they were capable of terrible violence, but they were also capable of incredible compassion. I know humans are dangerous, Zara said to the council, but I also know they have something we do not. They have a concept they call protective instinct. When humans see someone weaker being hurt, something inside them responds. They become angry, but it is a focused anger. They fight not for conquest, but for protection. I believe if we ask them for help, they will come. The debate that followed was intense. Many council members refused even to consider it. They cited reports of human wars, human crime rates, human capacity for destruction. But Chairman Vorath listened carefully to both sides. Finally, he made a decision. The council would send a message to Earth's military command. They would explain the situation and request assistance. If the humans refused or demanded too high a price, the council would look for other options. But they had to try. The message was composed carefully. It explained the Valeri situation, provided coordinates for Kepler-44 to be, and included footage of the Krath attack. It ended with a simple request for military assistance. The council sent the transmission toward Earth and waited. They expected negotiations might take days. They expected demands for payment or political concessions. They expected anything except what actually happened. 2 hours later, Earth's response arrived. It was a text-only message, just 2 words long. We're coming. The council chamber erupted in discussion. What did this mean? How many ships were coming? What would the humans demand in return? Chairman Vorath tried to send follow-up questions, but Earth's military command did not respond. Instead, 3 hours after the first message, a second transmission arrived. It was a brief status update indicating that 3 human ships had launched and were en route to Kepler-44 to be. Estimated arrival time, 21 days. The message also included a note that made several council members extremely nervous. No support required. We'll handle extraction and neutralization independently. Zara felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. The humans were coming, which meant the Valeri might be saved. But she also knew that the galaxy was about to see what humans were truly capable of when they decided to fight. She thought about David Chen and his gentle smile, and she wondered if the council had any idea what they had just unleashed. On Kepler-44 to be? Administrator Lyra huddled in a shelter with 30 other Valeri. The Krath soldiers were systematically searching every building, dragging out anyone they found. Lyra could hear screaming in the distance. She held a young Valeri child close and whispered comfort, even though she had no comfort to give. She did not know that help was coming. She did not know that on a distant world called Earth, 200 human Marines were boarding ships and preparing for war. She only knew that the Krath were coming closer and she was out of time. The child in her arms asked if they were going to die. Lyra wanted to lie, but her species valued truth. She opened her mouth to answer, not knowing what to say. Then the building shook as something massive struck the ground outside. The Krath soldiers began shouting in alarm. And somewhere in the chaos, Lyra heard a sound she did not recognize, the howl of human drop pods cutting through the atmosphere like meteors, bringing with them the full might of humanity's Deathworlders. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UHN's Prometheus, watching the stars streak past as the ship pushed toward maximum speed. Behind her, two more human vessels maintained tight formation. The Valkyrie and the Ranger were smaller than the Prometheus, but all three ships carried enough firepower to level a small moon. More importantly, they carried 200 of Earth's finest Marines. Men and women who had volunteered the moment they heard about the Valari situation. The Galactic Council had tried to send them tactical information about the Krath forces. They had offered intelligence briefings, strategic advisors, and detailed maps of Kepler 44b. Sarah had politely declined everything except the coordinates. Her response had confused the Council representatives, but it made perfect sense to her. Humans had been fighting wars since before recorded history. They understood combat at a level most peaceful species could not comprehend. The less interference they had from the Council, the more effectively they could operate. Sarah looked at the timer on her command console. 21 days to reach Kepler 4 for 2B. It seemed like an eternity when people were suffering. But she knew her team would use every moment to prepare. She opened the ship-wide communication channel and addressed her Marines. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that came from 15 years of military service. "We all know why we're here. The Valari are peaceful miners who've never hurt anyone. The Krath attacked them without provocation and are taking slaves. Our mission is simple: extract all friendly personnel and eliminate the Krath threat. We go in hard, we go in fast, and we don't stop until every Valari is safe. Any questions?" There were no questions. The Marines had already studied what little information existed about both species. The Valari were small, averaging about 4 feet tall, with large eyes adapted for low light. They came from a world with 60% of Earth's gravity and had evolved without significant predators. In other words, they were completely defenseless against military aggression. The Krath were more formidable, at least on paper. They were a reptilian species from a desert world, standing about 6.5 feet tall with natural armor plating. They had conquered 17 other species over the past 2 centuries, using superior technology and ruthless tactics. They took slaves to work in their industrial complexes and showed no mercy to those who resisted. The Galactic Council feared them, but lacked the military strength to oppose them. What the Krath did not know, they could not know, was what it meant to fight humans. Sarah watched her Marines train during the journey, and she felt a fierce pride. These men and women were products of Earth, a world that had tried to kill humanity every single day for millions of years. Every human alive was descended from ancestors who had survived disease, predators, natural disasters, and countless other threats. Humans were not the strongest species or the fastest, but they were the most persistent, the most adaptable, and the most dangerous when protecting others. The training sessions were intense. Marines practiced close-quarters combat in the ship's gym, moving through simulated environments with deadly efficiency. They drilled on extraction procedures, medical response, and tactical communication. They tested their equipment obsessively, knowing that in combat, equipment failure meant death, and they studied footage of Krath military operations. Looking for weaknesses to exploit, Lieutenant Marcus Johnson ran the combat simulations. He was a veteran of Earth's last major conflict, a man who understood urban warfare better than anyone else on the ship. He set up scenarios that would terrify most species, fighting in confined spaces, operating in hostile atmospheres, engaging enemies while protecting civilians. The Marines attacked each challenge with grim determination. Remember, Marcus told his team during one briefing, "The Krath are used to fighting species that evolved on easy worlds. They've never faced an enemy from a death world. They think their armor makes them tough. They think their weapons give them the advantage. They're wrong. We're faster, we're stronger, and we're a lot meaner than anything they've encountered before. Use that." The Galactic Council monitored the human ships during the journey. They sent regular updates requesting status reports and offering advice. Sarah responded to their messages politely but briefly. Yes, the ships were on schedule. No, they did not need additional support. Yes, they understood the rules of engagement. The council seemed anxious, almost desperate to maintain some control over the situation. Sarah understood their concern, but she also knew that committees did not win battles. Soldiers did. News of the human mission spread across the galaxy through official and unofficial channels. Some species were hopeful, seeing it as a chance to evaluate Earth's military capabilities. Others were terrified, fearing that bringing humans into galactic conflicts would lead to chaos. The Krath Empire itself issued a statement declaring that any human interference would be treated as an act of war. They warned Earth to stay out of their territory or face serious consequences. Sarah read the Krath statement and smiled coldly. Threats were meaningless. The Krath had attacked people who could not defend themselves. They had taken children as slaves. Whatever happened next, they had earned it. On day 18 of the journey, Sarah gathered her senior officers for a final strategy session. They reviewed everything they knew about the colony layout, the Krath force disposition, and the likely locations of Vel'Ari prisoners. The plan they developed was aggressive and risky, but that was how humans fought best. They would hit the Krath at night when humans had the advantage. They would use the colony's infrastructure against the enemy, and they would not stop until every Vel'Ari was free.
Oh.
One more thing, Sarah said as the meeting ended. The Galactic Council is expecting us to follow their rules of warfare. Formal challenges, proportional response, all that diplomatic nonsense. We're not going to do that. We're going to fight the way humans have always fought, to win. The Krath chose to be predators. We're going to show them what happens when you're prey. The officers nodded their understanding and returned to their units. Throughout the 3 ships, Marines checked their weapons one last time and wrote messages to loved ones back home just in case. They knew some of them might not survive the coming battle, but they also knew that the Vel'Ari children were counting on them. Even if those children did not yet know help was coming, on Kepler 44-B, the situation had grown worse. The Krath had enslaved over 1,000 Vel'Ari and were preparing to transport them off-world. Administrator Lyra was among the prisoners, locked in a holding facility with dozens of others. She had given up hope of rescue. The Galactic Council had sent sympathetic messages, but no actual help. The Vel'Ari were alone. Then, on the night of the 21st day, something changed. The Krath sensors detected 3 ships emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The Krath commander studied the readings with amusement. Only 3 ships? The humans had sent only 3 ships against an entire occupation force. It was almost insulting. The commander sent a message to his soldiers on the ground, telling them to prepare for possible combat, but not to worry. These humans, these Deathworlders, were about to learn an expensive lesson about interfering in Krath business. His soldiers checked their weapons and took up defensive positions around the colony. They were confident, experienced, and ready for battle. What they were not ready for was the sound of drop pods screaming through the atmosphere like angry gods, carrying warriors from Earth who had come to collect a debt written in blood.